As Nicole said, my name is Meg Harris. I am the data coordinator for the Whatcom Clean Water Program and work specifically at the Conservation District. I've been there about a year, so I've had the chance to meet a lot of you guys in this room, and I hope to meet the rest of you. So feel free to come by the district or give me a call if you have questions about water quality stuff. I'm going to touch a little bit on how to get to some of this information via some online maps that we have too, so that's a great way to connect and have that information if you'd like to get to it. But today I'm going to give you just kind of a brief overview of maybe like a year in review of water quality, and specifically focus on the Nooksack drainage, because I know most of you guys are located within the Nooksack Basin, and a little bit of marine water quality, and then just how to get to some of this information either through the district or online. So water flows through our communities, right? From little tributaries to drainage ditches to major creeks like the Fish Trap going through Linden, and then into larger water bodies like the Nooksack. And we'll kind of walk through all of these as I talk about water quality today. And finally out into marine waters, like the Portage Bay here. And we use this water for a lot of different things, for farming, for drinking, for recreation, for fishing and shellfish. And I think everyone in this room would agree that what we'd like to leave for our neighbors and our kids is clean water, right? And whatever that means to you, I think that's a shared value that we all have. We have some water quality concerns in Whatcom County, and bacteria is one of them, and it comes from a lot of different sources, right? So it can come from wildlife, it comes from us as humans, it can come from small and large farms. And the PIC program through the county, but with all of the partners, including the Conservation District, is focused on identifying these sources and working really in a ground-up, kind of boots-on-the-ground way of addressing a lot of these sources. And when I say these sources, I mean a lot of different things, everything from county health and septic systems to recreation and dog walkers to working with farmers. And so the identification part of this is the monitoring, right? How many people feel like they've seen someone out monitoring near their field or as they're driving around the county? I think all of your hands should probably be raised at this point, right? There's a lot of folks out there, including a handful of people that are in this room, that are sampling on a regular basis. I did some just rough numbers the other day, and I think 6,000 water quality samplers were collected in 2017 in our county. So that's a lot of samples out there, right? And the question is, what does this all mean? It's manpower, it's people out taking samples and processing them, but the important thing is, how does that correspond back to what we're doing on the ground? So once these samples are collected, they go to the lab, they get put in petri dishes and they sit for a day and let the bacteria grow. And at the end of that, what you're looking at when you see values on a map or in a table, maybe at a WIT meeting or online, are two things. Our fecal coliform concentrations primarily, and the goal is that those concentrations would meet a 2-part state and federal standard for water quality. I think a lot of you guys in this room are already familiar with what these numbers are, but just as a reminder, so there's an average over the course of 3 years. That's what we call the geometric mean, and that's a 100 fecal colony forming units per 100 milliliters. That unit isn't that important, but what we're looking at is that 100 number. That's kind of a benchmark for us. The other number is 200, and that is to account for the fluctuations over the year, right? So we do have a lot of big storms around here. We do have seasonal changes, and this standard allows us to account for some of those in that 90th percentile. We're saying no more than 10% of samples should be over 200. So those are kind of two benchmarks to keep in mind, and especially as you're looking at data in the future or numbers that are coming off of sites like around your fields. And how do we assess that? Well, we have monitoring all across the county in all of the big watersheds. There's about 90 active sites that are sampled monthly or twice monthly. And there's over 300 sites that are sampled for source identification or storm sampling. So again, a lot of information is being collected out there. But the important thing, in my opinion, is what does this mean? Like, are we making progress in water quality, or what does water quality look like? So I've taken some figures from the most recent county samples, specifically for the Nooksack Basin, and I'm going to focus on the main stem Nooksack, and then we'll dive into some of the tributaries, and then we can talk a little bit about marine water quality. So one way that is pretty valuable to look at this is as a mean or average over time. And so this figure shows from 2011 to 2017, those averages in the main stem. And there's two sites on this graph. One is the Nooksack running through Ferndale, and the other is just below that at Marine Drive. So these are kind of indicator sites. They're the closest sites to the marine waters, and everything that's coming into the Nooksack will be captured at these sites. So I think the big takeaway from this is that we are seeing improving trends at sites around the county, around the Nooksack Basin, and that's being reflected in the main stem Nooksack. You can see really that dropping trend as early as 2014, 2015, and things are looking pretty good out there. We still get spikes during some high rain events, but those overall average trends is encouraging. And the two blue lines on here I've put are two more sites. They're what we call M4 and M5. They're kind of the upstream sites. So M4 is at Hannigan Road, and M5 is in Everson. And you see that those lower main stem sites are really getting close to the upper main stem sites, and that's yeah, that's great. You also, one thing I keep in mind as someone who's tied into kind of like the data or looking at all these numbers is not only are those really decreasing, but they're also getting, the variability in them is a lot less. So you don't see these big spikes or fluctuations. It's pretty consistently low. So really promising. And I'm going to take that and for each of the main tributaries into the Nooksack, the county and sampling partners collect samples twice a month. So there's about 19 stations that are collected twice a month and represent each of those tributary watersheds into the Nooksack. And generally we're seeing good trends too. 17, well, let me explain. I think many of you have seen this figure already. It's in a lot of the monthly water quality reports that are posted online, and I have a handful of those if you'd like to see them. But basically what we're looking at is the bars are 3-year averages, and the black dots inside the bars are the past 1-year average. So what we'd like to see is that bar dropping below 100, but also those black dots are really important because it shows like really what we've been doing lately. And so any of the black dots that are below the top of the bar means the last year was better than the last 3 years. What we don't want to see is any black dots that are above the bars. That means that the last year has actually worse water quality than the long-term average. So 17 out of these 19 stations have improved in the last year over 3 years. That's a really good trend. And it's pretty consistent. This is 89% of these 19 stations, but that's pretty consistent over what we're seeing across the entire Nooksack watershed. So when we look at, this is 19 stations, there's about 90 stations. We're still seeing that about 85 to 90% improvement at stations. Some stations are meeting this standard for geometric mean, a handful still aren't. So same figure, same way of looking at it, but this is for that 90th percentile. So this accounts for how many stations are over 200 either during big storm events or, some watersheds seasonally will actually see those high counts in the summer. But same sort of improving trend. 84% or 16 out of these 19 stations are improving in the last year over 3 years. You'll notice a lot more orange bars on this. Those are the sites that don't meet this part of the 2-part standard. And this is pretty typical, that sites will meet, if they're going to meet one part of that 2-part standard, they'll meet the geometric mean or that first figure, and they won't meet the 90th percentile. Ultimately, what we're looking for is to have them meet both parts of the 2-part standard. One thing that's happened in the last couple of months that is also really encouraging is that the sites at M2 and M1 have dropped below that 10%. So currently those 2 sites are meeting both parts of the water quality standard. And from my point of view, I see these improving trends, and I just like to recognize that they're the result of hard work from many people. They're a result of hard work from everyone in this room, from everyone that's out sampling, from folks that are testing their septic systems, from folks that are walking their dogs. And so just a couple of numbers I have for you. Over 2,000 septic systems were inspected this year. A handful of those are failing and have been replaced. So that piece of it is contributing to these improvements. 15 creekside pet waste stations were put in along the fish shop in Linden. That was a collaborative effort between the city and some volunteers in the conservation district. 28 new farm plants through the conservation district through the PIC program. So all of that is contributing to improvements in water quality. But we do still have some work to do. We get these big rain events. We live in Washington, in Western Washington. And for example, that we've had a couple in the last couple months, one kind of mid-November and one at the end of December, right before Christmas. Rain in the 2 to 4 inches. And when that happens, we still get high counts in many of the watersheds. And so with those stations that we were just looking at with the figure, we get some high counts on that November storm, and we get some high counts in that December storm too. And so I just encourage you to stay diligent out there, especially when you see rain coming and things like following the advisories that Nicole was talking about, and just being on top of what's coming down the line in terms of weather is really important. And hopefully we can assist with that. So that December storm, for example, we saw high counts through a lot of the watersheds, not just in the Nooksack, but in other drainages. We also saw high counts coming across the border. And sometimes we're trying to wrap our heads around when those high counts coming across the border will persist, and you'll see them all the way down into fish trap or even into the main stem. And sometimes they don't. But it's coming from all over, and so this is one thing that we're, as water quality specialists, keeping our eyes on and hopefully able to help tease apart where some of these high counts are coming from. So just generally, my big takeaways are improving trends across most sites and across all the watersheds. But we still do have some work to do with elevated bacteria after large rain events and just being on top of it, thinking ahead for some of these rain events. And then we're really putting in some work, and we have in this past year and will continue to work with Canadian partners to address some of those high counts at the border. And that affects some of the watersheds that you live and work in, and it doesn't affect others, but it's all part of the big picture. And I'd also just like to recognize all the work that everyone's been doing this past year. We've had some pretty extreme weather events, and you know that better than I do. We had, kind of a crazy winter last year. We've had some storms this year, and I think it's really encouraging that we continue to see those improving trends with some big storms, really good management on your part, and I know there were some challenges with like keeping lagoons last winter, and we still continue to see these trends even with big rain that we've seen over the course of the year. So just keep up the good work and help share what you're doing through programs like Fred was talking about. Okay, and all of this information that I've just showed you is accessible to the public, is available to you. You're probably the folks that can use it the most directly and help you decide how you're managing your land. So all of this is available online. You can go to the county website and this interactive map. And when you click on this map, you'll see sites with dots indicating fecal coliform concentrations. If you click on a dot, you can get some more information about it. Like on the right, it'll tell you what the sampling date was, who sampled it, so which agency was out there, what the result was. And so if you have any questions about how to use this, feel free to contact me or come into the Conservation District. I can walk you through it. And or give me a call on the phone and say what has it been looking at around my site. There's a handful of you in the room that do that, and I appreciate you taking the initiative. I'm happy to look at this map and help you out. But if you are looking at it on your own and you have any questions, let me know. One feature that I really like is this all water quality results. If you click on this arrow to the right, it'll be a pop-down list of any result that was taken approximately in the last 3 years. We don't have a lot of the older data on here, but especially for that recent, like within the last year, you'll definitely see any result that was taken for that site. So that's this arrow right here. And then there's some more features that if you really are savvy online, you can figure out, or I can walk you through. There's like some filters you can do to look at specific sites or specific date ranges. If you want to go back and say only look at like that December 19th, 20th storm, you could do that through some of these features right up here. So let me know if you have any questions about that. But mostly what I want to convey is it's all out there for you to see and use. Before I move into some marine water quality, are there questions that you have for me either about the freshwater results that I've just described or about how to get to any of this information? Yeah?
Is there any way you could go back to the bar graphs and just run through what those 17 sampling stations were?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so there are 4 stations on the main stem that are on the right side here, starting upstream and working downstream. So M5 is Everson down to M1, which is Marine Drive. There's one site in Anderson. There's 3 sites in Scott Ditch, starting on the furthest west, S1, and working your way east. S3 is Thiel Road. And there's 2 sites in Cannes. There's these F1 and F3 are fish trap. So F1 is River Road and F3 is upstream just south of Linden. Double Ditch, east and west. F4 is fish trap above, let's see, do you know what the cross street is? It's like lower Linden, essentially, within city limits. Bertrand, which is at Rathbone, Snyder and Cougar, and 10 Mile. So those are essentially what we look at, like indicator sites. They represent, they don't capture an entire drainage, but they kind of, we use them to represent that drainage. And then with this, as many of you know, there's some focused sampling in certain watersheds, especially in fish trap. There's about 25 samples that get taken twice a month, so a lot more information there, and you can get to that information online too. 10 Mile as well. But these as like the lowest portions of those watersheds are an easier way to keep an eye on things in a more manageable list.
I will probably more comment than a question, but I think I mentioned to you, I pulled this sheet out, they've been doing this for a few years, and I pulled this out from 2 and even 3 years ago. Huge differences on there, and I don't know if you looked at that and explained it. If you look at it now versus then, most of the bar graphs are above 200 for a lot of them, correct?
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out. When we look at some of these sites, even the ones that are, whether or not they're below 100, for many sites we're looking at like halving of those averages. And just a couple of years ago, there were sites that had averages that were above 2 or above 4 or even above 500. And I think this is probably a good place to see that too. And I've taken those same 19 sites and put them on a graph like this, and it looks really similar. So this is for the main stem, so the concentrations tend to be lower, like less than 100 even in that 2015, but the same figure for these 19 sites would be like 700, could be a maximum. So really significant improvements over the last 3 years. And so one question, I mean, ultimately all of this water from the Nooksack is flowing into Portage Bay. And we can look at Portage in the same way with those rolling averages. So here are averages for Portage Bay. Each of the different colored lines is a sampling station. Within the bay, you can see, this is small, but just any of these black dots are sampling stations. But you see generally the same trend at any of these stations, just with some fluctuation. But this graph goes from 1993 all the way to 2017. So here's 2003, 2004. Sites were meeting the criteria for water quality. Down here to 2009, started creeping back up, and here in this 2014 to 2016 period, we're exceeding that water quality standard again. And so this is an annual average. We can look at the same thing for each season for open and close periods. But that improving trend in freshwater we're seeing in marine waters as well. And we've been seeing it since about 2014. It's creeping down until now. Within the last 6 months, all of these sites have been meeting the standard for water quality in Portage Bay. So that doesn't mean that it's going to be opened right away. Again, there's fluctuation seasonally, but DOH has been keeping an eye on this trend, and it's encouraging. And with that, I'd just like to celebrate some of the achievements in terms of water quality, marine water quality that correspond directly to improvements in freshwater over this past year. So last December, just over a year ago, in Drayton Harbor, 810 acres of commercial shellfish were reopened due to improved water quality. And just about a month ago, a year later, 129 acres in Birch Bay were also reopened for shellfish. So a reflection of all the work that's being done in the upper watershed to show these improvements in marine waters as well. And it's all, and it is really, truly all a result of each person doing their piece and each group their little piece of the puzzle. So whether that's dog waste or septic systems, marine uses, farm plans. So it all fits into this larger puzzle. Oh, I didn't realize I was animated. There you go. What a surprise. Everyone is working really hard over the past year and 3 years to make this happen. And so I'd just like to thank all of you in this room for all your hard work that you've been doing to contribute to that. contact me if you have any questions about how to get to this information. And with that all, I think I have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Who's going to be first?
You mentioned there were still high counts in the 2 winter months, November and December. Were those high counts still being narrowed down to agricultural sources, or?
Specific high counts I can't answer. Generally, I think there's a realization that it's coming from a lot of different places. I think that understanding some of this border question is going to be really valuable for that. One thing I'll say is that that high counts were spread pretty well throughout the county in terms of like not having a single watershed being a problem. But I will mention also that when I showed you that table of high counts, and we're talking about high counts in the thousands. There was a time where that was kind of just par for the course, and I think what Fred's point was too is that when we look at, we're looking at relative high counts too, which tenfold of that would have been high. So I don't know. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, the couple of points on that, I think. The border issue is a real strong one. That's a real big one. There's some big counts that come across at times there. And it affects all the way through the system, especially in the fish trap. I also agree with you that high counts are pretty relative. I'm thinking of, there's a group that's really excited about sampling a certain area, and he said to me, we got a high count. We got to check it out. It was on that December 20, and I said, what was your high count? And he said, oh, it's 500. I laughed at him because I said, boy, high counts in the fish trap is 8,000. He was shocked. So, yeah, high count is really relevant depending on where you are and what you're working with. So.
Any other questions? Well, feel free to come talk to me at lunch or after the event, or come by the conservation district anytime. I'd love to work with anyone who has questions about what they can do.
And does anyone, Meg, we can even pull up that map if folks want to see it. We do have a little bit of extra time with her. Or if you have questions really specific about your watershed, she obviously has a lot of knowledge off the top of her head. She's dealing with these numbers all the time. So are there any other specific, if you want to know something specific about your watershed, that was one of those bars, it's a great time to ask her questions about it. If you have it, probably 8 other people in the room have it. Someone just has to ask it first, But. Yeah.
You commented on buffers there for water quality. What I've seen is we end up with more wildlife in the buffers. So how are the buffers actually improving the quality as far as the fecal stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. And during certain times of year, they'll affect it a little bit differently. One thing that buffers are really good at is preventing surface runoff from getting just directly into a ditch or into a creek. And so to just slow that water down a little bit, have time for it to get into the soil, and whether that's suspended solids or bacteria, it allows it from just going directly into the ditch. There's been quite a bit of work done recently too to look at areas that might have wildlife, whether that's raccoon latrines and scouting them out, and the county's actually out there getting their hands dirty, shoveling out raccoon latrines and putting in kind of mesh barriers so they can't be right down by the creek. properly managed buffers should be able to address some of these water qualities without having like really big wildlife concerns, yeah, it's a really good question. And understanding, I think, kind of where some of this bacteria is coming from, a lot of the sampling is helping, but we'll continue to do that in the next couple, coming years. There's a lot of, I guess I'd like to say that in terms of this water quality, I like to think of it as like a pretty big toolbox, and grab sampling or this monitoring is one tool in that toolbox. It's pretty handy, like really useful tool. Maybe it's the hammer of the toolbox. It's like probably the most commonly used and just a really good like initial step. And then there's other tools in that box, whether it's bracket sampling to get down to a really specific location, potentially some DNA sampling, or just a lot of different other monitoring tools that we can be looking at to identify like what the actual sources of bacteria would be in specific to any given water body, or like even stretch. Could be a 100-meter stretch of a ditch, and I have very different inputs than a different stretch. So Nicole's brought up the online map, and this, again, you can get to it from the Conservation District website. You can also get to it from the county website. What you'll see here is that there are a lot of sites around the county that get sampled, and one way we've chosen to address this on the online map is you'll see sites be color coordinated to their concentration of fecal coliform for 2 weeks. And so you'll see the colored sites up here are the last 2 weeks of data. Once 2 weeks elapses, they go gray. And so you still get to see them where they're located, and if you click on any of those gray dots, you'll also see all the information behind them, so you'll see what the concentrations were on specific dates and who took the sample. And same thing for any of these colored dots. That color just represents the most recent sample that was taken in the last 2 weeks. And things are looking pretty good out there in the last 2 weeks in terms of low counts in most of the watersheds since the end of December.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what type of criteria or different organizations are contributing to this data? I mean, how many different organizations are taking samples? And how is this streamlined so that, everyone's using qualified labs or certified labs? Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. That's a great question. So there are a number of agencies that send data to be published on this map. This map is housed through the Conservation District, but it's managed with Department of Ag as well. Curry, who many of you know at Department of Ag, has done a lot of work in the last year making this accessible and easy to read and hopefully intuitive as you use it. So Department of Ag, Department of Ecology, the county, the Conservation District are the main contributors to this map. And those are the groups that are taking the most samples on a regular basis. There's been some discussions with the WIDs if they'd like to add their data to the maps as well, because they're taking regular samples. And that could be samples that are taken on a monthly basis. In the 10-mile watershed, the 10-mile Clean Water Group does quite a bit of the routine sampling, and they're adding their data to this as well. There are 2 labs in Whatcom County that analyze bacteria, Exact Scientific and Edge, and they both are certified labs. They work directly with the state to maintain their certifications for fecal coliform, E. coli, and a number of other bacteria analysis. You might have had like Enterococcus or Streptococcus samples that you've seen if you've had samples taken on your property. This is this is primarily fecal coliform because that's the standard and that's one way of tracking it, but we also have all that information if agencies are also taking E. coli samples too. In terms of process, our goal is to get information up onto this map as quickly as possible. That's when it's the most useful, especially like if you're out there working on your field and you want to know, did something you do have an impact 3 days later? The quicker that we can get it up here, the more valuable. So samples are analyzed in the lab. Because of the way they're analyzed for bacteria, it takes about 24 to 36 hours to get a result back. And that's because the bacteria have to sit and divide and grow on that plate. But as soon as any of these groups get their results back from the lab, they send the lab results directly to me at the conservation district, and I can get it up onto the map within a day. So generally, the maps, generally if a sample's taken out in the field, say like on a Tuesday afternoon, it goes to the lab, we get results back by Wednesday or Thursday, and it gets up by Thursday or Friday onto the map.
Maybe you can also touch on who's taking the routine samples and like the quality control and training that's associated with that?
Yeah. So within all of those agencies, each group has a number of field staff that are out taking these samples. They're trained in both how to take the sample, where to take the sample, and, you know, kind of managing that sample as they get it to the lab, making sure it stays cold, making sure it gets to the lab in the appropriate amount of time, which is usually 6 to 8 hours. And we meet every other week as field staff from all these different groups to talk about water quality concerns, also other questions that we have. And so that is a really great venue for people like staying up on their training and having questions about either specific sites or what they're seeing out in the field or how to take these samples. And then we have kind of scheduled trainings at least annually just to make sure people are up to speed on how to take these samples with standard methods, making sure that we're complying with our quality control plans. And every sample run that goes out, so say the county goes out and takes 20 samples, a number of those samples will be duplicates. So they're taking 2 samples at one site, and that is a way of statistically checking whether, like how good the sampling is, whether the lab is also doing duplicates of samples too, so they have their own system of checking their quality control. And field length sometimes will take samples out into the field that are just pure water, make sure they come back as pure water, make sure they don't come back with bacteria in them for whatever reason, whether that's like sloppy handling or the way that the lab is looking at it. So there's a lot of checks and rechecks on making sure that this is accurate data.
Can I touch on the border sampling too?
Yeah, so you'll see a couple of sites across the border. There's about 12 sites that get sampled by Langley Environmental Partners. That's a Canadian group that's out sampling monthly, and they've started sending their results to us as well. So that's been really great to have. So you can add them to the list of people that are adding data to this. And we've been working pretty directly with them to address some of the high counts at our U.S. border sites, but also if they're getting high counts at their sites in Canada, they'll be in touch with us too. So that's been really beneficial in the last couple of months, and we hope to continue to do that throughout the year. We've had some meetings with field staff up there too, so that we now have a system where if we get high counts at the border, say like something over 1,000, we can alert them, and they have a system in place to go out and kind of check. So there's a lot being done in terms of that cross-border partnership. And they actually send their results to a Whatcom County lab too, so we know that they're comparable in terms of quality of data.
you know, guys, I've been involved in the Portage Bay Shellfish Advisory Committee meeting for several years, and I'm sure you probably want to know, you know, a lot of this is funded through your tax dollars, and your tax dollars being used efficiently or not. And I would say maybe a few years back, I would have been a little frustrated with that, but they have done a really good job of narrowing in on this. I think they had a couple of really good hires. One was moving Erica Douglas at the county into a full-time position on that. Another one was getting Meg engaged in really focusing in and narrowing in on this data. And better organization overall of who's sampling where. I'm feeling really good about where it is right now, and I think for the most part, it's helped to exonerate you guys more often than not. Doesn't mean it's total, but for instance, it used to be, well, generally fish traps high, and somebody would say, well, it must be the farmers. Well, you get in there in more detail and you find out, well, actually, there's a lot of stuff in the city that's going on. Oh, there's some septics that are failing, and yeah, there's a couple farm issues, but it's really helped to focus in and not just exonerate you guys, but also more importantly, fix the issues. So I'm really encouraged with where we're heading. I think it's not going to be too long, hopefully, that the shellfish beds are open, and maybe some of this pressure comes off a little bit too.
Yeah, I would say I've gotten questions over the year about, you know, maybe you'll see different agencies out sampling on a certain day, and I guess I'd just like to say there is a lot of cooperation between these agencies, both, you know, phone calls and emails and plans even ahead of time. But if there's a big rain event and one agency is going out, making sure that we're capturing all the different sites that we want to get a really good picture, but not duplicating efforts unnecessarily. So there is a lot of communication between people in terms of actually going out and just getting samples. And then these maps allow us to look at results